Welcome to Stories That Matter. I am your host, Doug Thompson. My special guest is Eric Atkinson. You would know him as the voice of agriculture today. And you would know him for about almost 4 decades of doing that. Eric, thank you so much for being here.
Well, thank you, Doug. I appreciate the opportunity. Great to visit with you.
No, it's nice to visit with you. Looking forward to it because tell me about, you were a farm kid, and lo and behold, you wind up on the radio for about 4 decades, and you've interviewed, and you've at one time your show was out to about 80 of the 105 counties across Kansas, and you worked with some really, really interesting people and did some really good interviews. So tell me about your growing up days. Did you grow up on a farm?
I'll keep it as brief as I can. So
No,
I
you
did
don't
grow up
have
on a
to.
farm, yes. I I grew up on a farm east of Winfield in Cowley County, which is south and east of Wichita, for those who may not be familiar with that geography. Uh, we had a typical family farm: crops, cattle, wheat, grain sorghum, soybeans. We didn't do much of that, but we did alfalfa, lots of hay, put up a lot of hay bales back in the day before there was a big ground baler ever in existence. And I was the eldest of, and am the eldest of 5 brothers. So all of us were very busy on the farm with our folks, of course.
Yeah. And when you talk about putting up hay, was that with did you use like when I started, well, we used the old horse head baler and didn't have much for good equipment. And so the 2 hooks, grab the bale, put it onto the trailer and stack it and
There,
go unload it.
there was some of that. Yeah, there was some of that. Thankfully, my dad and my grandfather were both very innovative mechanically, and we did upgrade some from that. My dad, I have to get the time frame right. It would have been in the late 60s. Purchased one of the what were called green monsters, one of the first ones made. I believe they were made in Mount Hope, Kansas. They were the self-propelled hay gatherers, if you will, with the snout with the auger on the front, and you drive around and pick up bales that way. So we put up thousands and thousands and tens of thousands of bales with that machine for years before the even more modern equipment came along. So, but we got our share of stacking bales in very hot barns and what have you, like a lot of other folk who grew up on the farm experienced.
Yeah, it was a lot of work, but as I look back on them, they were good experiences, and we always enjoyed it. And especially, we really enjoyed it, Eric, when there would be a city kid would come out and want to spend the day with us or something out there working, and I can pick, I don't need a hay hook, and they pick up the strings, and it wasn't too long to where they were wore out and couldn't be of any more help to you. You ran
They
across them
didn't
too, I'm
last very
sure.
long. They didn't have the stamina typically.
Nope, no, they didn't. So you go from the farm, then what happens? You leave the farm at some point in time, and you decide you were going to go into college?
I did. I had designs on getting into broadcasting. I'd always appreciated and was sort of captivated by broadcasting, particularly radio, when I was a youth. And so after graduating from Winfield High School in 1974, I went on to Kansas State University and pursued a degree in radio and television broadcasting. And that was a program that was very strong and continues to be strong to this day. And I received my degree in that curriculum in 1978, and then I was off into the commercial radio world, starting that summer at Pratt, KWLS in Pratt. For a variety of reasons, that wasn't my cup of tea, and I won't go into any details about that, but I had an opportunity shortly thereafter to move on to KCLY in Clay Center, which was a relatively new station. I was familiar with it. I'd worked there part-time, well, on the weekends when I was in college. So an opportunity to be a news and sports director there opened up. I went there in 1978 in the fall and was there until the spring or early summer of 80, or no, beg your pardon, 79. And then I decided, I need to probably go back to school and broaden my opportunities. So I went back to the farm and worked there for a brief time, made some money working in a factory as well, and then went to graduate school in the fall of, it would have been the winter of 1980, returned to K-State to go to graduate school and to get a master's degree in communications, which I completed in 1982. And then it was on to another radio gig. This was at a public radio station in Hutchinson at the KHCC, and I worked there as a development and promotion director for a year. And then fate came calling in the spring of '83 when the opportunity to work at K-State and then KSAC was presented. And that's a story into itself.
And that's awesome. We're going to cut away, take a break. You're watching Stories That Matter. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Stories That Matter. I'm your host, Doug Thompson, with my special guest, Eric Atkinson, and it's tough for both him and I not to just look at him and say, no, he's the host. I'm the one that's being interviewed. And then no, that's not right. It's the other way around. I'm so used to seeing him handle the interviews. And so when we left off right before break, why you said that the doors opened for you just at the right time. And was that over at K-State?
That was at Kansas State University. A long time and revered radio station that K-State had maintained since 1924, KSAC Radio, suddenly had an opening, in an unfortunate situation, had an opening for its agriculture director. My predecessor, Paul DeWeese, who was renowned as an agriculture broadcaster and as a sportscaster as well, had unexpectedly passed away at a very early age, I believe of 62 or 3. And a void was created immediately. It was suggested to me that I should apply by some people who were familiar with the situation. And I was stunned and shocked to get the call while I was on the farm in the late spring, early summer of 1983 saying, we'd like you to come here. And I wasted no time saying yes, because it really was a dream job in a number of ways. And I was able to merge my experiences in agriculture with my appreciation for radio and broadcasting very quickly there. And at the age of 26, off I ran amidst giants in the industry on that staff who were immensely helpful in helping me getting my feet under me and getting past the bright lights and the dazzle of working at KSAC with all those tremendous people. So off we went.
How long would you be on the air when you would go on at that particular time? Was it for a number of hours or just a few minutes? Or
At that time, Agriculture Today was a 30-minute radio broadcast starting at 12:30 each weekday. And it consisted of, and it still to this day consists of, interviews with the scientists and specialists in agriculture at K-State and others allied with the industry. And that continued the half-hour format for Ag Today until, I can't remember for sure, but probably around 1990 or in that ballpark, when the staff, with my encouragement, decided to allow the expansion of Agriculture Today to a full hour. So we were on the air from 12:30 to 1:30 on 580 AM KKSU by that time. We changed call letters in 1984 from KSAC to KKSU. And then it has been an hour roughly up until recently. With my retirement, there were some shiftings made to shorten it a bit. But by and large, for a lot of years, it was an hour-long radio broadcast.
And the territory that it covered?
On the radio station itself, before it, and that's another story, the selling of the station, but on KSAC/KKSU, it covered virtually the entire state of Kansas, with the exception of probably the western fourth of the state, half of Missouri. It would edge into parts of Oklahoma and certainly southern Nebraska with its signal. That was at 580, at 5,000 watts, that was a big reach. And that's what made it a valuable tool. It was a way to reach farmers, ranchers, or whomever your audience might be with information from the university spanning virtually the entire state. In the early days, it would go much further than that, but then radio became such that they divvied up frequencies and constricted the patterns and all of this to the point where it was less than it was. But at one time, you could hear KSAC in the early days as far east as Indianapolis. I'm not sure how far west, but probably Denver or beyond. But then they started divvying up the broadcasting pie a little more, and the frequencies were condensed down.
So the title to it, of course, was and is Agriculture Today. What does that mean other than what it sounds like? What were you concentrating on that farmers and others would want to listen to and garner some wisdom from it?
I really played off of what was contemporary and what was important to agriculture producers at the time, which means you need to stay on top of things and keep your ear to the ground. But really what it amounted to was an outlet for our people on campus and associated with the university to share the information that they were generating in their work with producers and with allied industries in agriculture, ag lenders, ag equipment dealers, whomever it might be. That was the orientation of it. Of course, there are seasonal things. In June, you talk about wheat harvest in Kansas. In February, March, you talk about calving for our beef cattle producers. Seasonal things that just naturally fit. You try to come up with material that will associate with those things going on the farm or ranch any given point in the year. But again, the driver behind all of this was our expertise on campus. We provided the conduit for them through the radio station as a part of extension to get their word out as to what they're discovering about this, that, or the other thing. And that was really our purpose, very simple. The strength of the broadcast was solely on the shoulders of those folks because they carried the ball. They had the information. We simply provided them a way to get it out to people.
Well, I can imagine how tremendous that was because of the research that goes on at Kansas State, and then being able to have somebody come on air with you and say, well, here's what our latest research shows, here's what this is, and if you do this, here's what you can anticipate. Because as you and I both know, farming is a tough industry. That's a hard work, and sometimes, depending upon the weather, there's not much margin to work with. And equipment is always breaking, especially when, like in your case, you got 4 brothers, and you. It's pretty easy to tear up the equipment. We had my brother and I, and between us, we raced when we plowed and did everything else. And I'm sure that the parents weren't very happy when we tore the stuff up. But it happens. It just happens. We're going to cut away, take a break, Eric. We'll be right back. You're watching Stories That Matter. Welcome back to Stories That Matter. I'm your host, Doug Thompson. My special guest, of course, is Eric Atkinson, and you would know him from Agriculture Today because he was on the air for 39 years, and just like he was talking about before the changes in the that took place with the radios, why that program may have been listened to as far as Indianapolis and off to the west, not sure, but a very long amount of territory. And we were talking about Agriculture Today because filming that, working that, and distributing that from Kansas State gave you access to the most advanced individuals and research that was possible. I'm assuming that would be the situation.
That's correct, Doug. It was the joy of working there, the fact that you got to work with these extremely capable, intelligent, and largely, almost to a person, affable people. They knew what their purpose was in terms of helping agriculture, and were very, very doggedly devoted to that. And it was a great learning experience for me. I mean, it was a classroom for me personally because I got exposure to cutting edge information on a daily basis. And if I'm paying attention at all to what they're saying, I'm gaining something. So, which I was paying attention. it was extraordinarily rewarding to be part of that. Again, we were a function of the Extension Service. I was technically an Extension specialist. So serving that purpose and reaching out to folks with the information was genuinely a joy. It was, I already miss that to a certain extent. And it's a purpose that was a great deal to be a part of, just tremendous opportunity. So yeah, it was rewarding working with all those great folks. I wish I could remember them all and cite them all.
Well, you had some really quality people that were on air with you. I was looking at that list of some of those, and of course didn't know all of them, but I knew Deb Nelson, and because he's the voice of the Wildcats for many years, and I can remember as a youngster shooting baskets up in the hay barn, up in the loft up there, shooting at that and listening to Deb Nelson talking about K-State and the basketball. And you remember obviously working with him. What was he like away from the mic? What was he like?
One of the grandest gentlemen you would ever meet. He was genuine. He was a kid from Marquette, Kansas. Very humble, although he was quite accomplished in his career, obviously, well known throughout the state and beyond. He had opportunities to go broadcast elsewhere. I believe, if I remember right, he had a chance to go broadcast with the Cardinals, St. Louis Cardinals at one point. He chose to stay in Manhattan, stay with K-State. He was obviously utterly devoted to the university and to K-State athletics. But on a more personal note, just a grand human being, had a tremendous sense of humor, could be as goofy as anybody there. We bonded very quickly. We were on the same staff for 5 years. He retired in 1988. So I had 5 joyous years of having an office literally next to his. We had great conversations, and again, just a great gentleman, and a great ambassador for K-State, and ended up being a very dear friend.
Oh, I can imagine. He was a very likable person, and all of those good things that you said about him, I would certainly agree. He was just one of those. I never saw him get rattled. Nothing he worried. He just dealt with every situation, and he was a pleasure to be around. Who was your first interview? When you first started, do you remember the first person that you interviewed on the radio?
Yeah, I think I do. I don't have a lot of confidence in that, Doug. I've been asked that before recently. I think it was a gentleman by the name of Don Mock. Don was an extension livestock entomologist at K-State. His specialty would be in, for example, cattle fly control, these kinds of things. And I didn't write it down at the time. in July of 1983 when I started, this is my first interview. But if my memory serves, if it wasn't Don was one of the first. But I think it was Don Mock, I think.
Well, I'm sure it was a good interview, especially being the first one while you were concentrating on it, and that's what has to happen. When you have been doing this for 39 years, you probably have a few stories of, well, we were doing this time, and here's what went wrong. And did you have any of those?
Had a few, and mostly it was human error. I mean, in this business, sometimes you forget to push the right button or start the right recorder or what have you, and you think you've got it recorded, and lo and behold, you don't. So, 15 minutes later, after you finish the conversation with your guest, you check it, play it back to see if it's there, and and it's very, I don't want to say difficult, but it can be challenging to re-record an interview for the guest, because they're thinking as they do the second recording, did I say that the first time? And they start to stir it in their minds, and it makes it more challenging and less of a free-flowing thought. And so that happened probably, I don't know, 7 or 8 times, I suppose, in 40 years, but which could be worse, I guess. But those are always always awkward times, but our people were so good to work with. Nobody really made an issue of it. I do recall one episode, though. If I have time, I'll tell you very quickly.
You do?
I was interviewing outside of the studio over in Waters Hall, one of our entomologists, and I was using a portable recorder. I plugged the recorder into his power strip, which he had his computer plugged into that. And he'd been working on a document for days. And long story short, we recorded the interview with him, and I prepared to leave, and I reached over to unplug, and I inadvertently swiped the power switch on the power strip, which killed his computer. And yes, he had not saved a stitch of what he was working on. That was an awkward moment. He was very gracious and didn't blow up, which he could have very easily. But that was a very humbling experience. What do you do? Where do you hide?
That's a good one. I knock on wood, I haven't done that one yet, but I can understand. I mean, what do you say? Sorry.
Yeah. My bad. I have to leave.
How many hours?
Thank you for your time. That's right.
Yeah,
it was an awkward moment, but again, he was gracious about it.
Well, that happens when you're in the business, and there's just no way around it. We're going to cut away, take a break. We'll be right back. You're watching Stories That Matter. Welcome back to Stories That Matter, and I'm your host, Doug Thompson, with my special guest, Eric Atkinson. And Eric, we're coming down to the final segment of this. I have really enjoyed visiting with you, and I heard you on the radio lots of times at K-State, and you did a tremendous job. Thank you. What are you doing now?
Well, briefly, I'm here in western Wabaunsee County. My wife and I have a house and acreage here, which we rent out the grass to a neighbor. But there are always things to do here, fixing a water gap or something on the barn or the house or whatnot. So I seem to find a lot of that going on. I am just about to hopefully start a service where I would go out and at a farm family's request and interview their elders to capture their memoirs of their lives on the farm. That's in the incubation stage right now, but I'm hoping that within the next couple of 3 months, we'll get that all pulled together and make that happen. So those are the two things that I have on my mind right now.
And that sounds fantastic. And Eric, thank you for taking time to visit with us. And I hope you folks have enjoyed visiting with Eric Atkinson, Stories That Matter. God bless you. Take care.